What's up, guys? Ryan here at Signature Edits, and inside of this Lightroom tutorial, I'm going to show you how to take this photo from here to here inside of Lightroom. So without further ado, let's hit the intro and get into it. If you want to edit along with me, you can head to signatureedits.com/free-raw-photos, and you can download this free raw file and edit along. Okay, let's hit that intro and get into it. All right, so I'm here with my memory card. I just got back from a shoot last night. It was a really fun one out on Ptarmigan, I'm not exactly sure how to say it, Ptarmigan Circle, something like that, in Kananaskis National Park. And I've got the raw files here. And the reason that I'm doing this instead of just jumping right into the actual tutorial is because I just want to show you really quickly what a typical shoot looks like versus what you might think you get. So what I mean by that is, most of the time, you see all these amazing photographers' images, and you have no idea how many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of crappy photos went into getting just one decent one. Okay, so that is the wrong thing. Let's do one more. So I'm using Photo Mechanic here just to cull my photos, and the reason I'm doing that is because it's a lot faster than Lightroom. So here's the shoot yesterday. Okay, so I'm just going to show you like hundreds of just meh photos go into finding just one good spot. And I'm just taking photos the entire trip of the entire thing. Probably there's like 3 or 4 that I actually am going to keep. Like maybe I could keep one of these, but the one we're going to be looking at today, if I exit this view, is probably going to be one of these guys right here. Okay, so you can see we found this awesome spot up on the hill overlooking the mountains, and it was great, except for the fact that I wish I had a telephoto lens, because you see how far these mountains look? If I'd had a telephoto, those mountains would have been like right there. It would have looked so much more epic. But you can see all of the photos taken, just not looking good, getting the right composition. Looks like I'm not even in focus, so that's super helpful. Nope, not in focus. All right, so different poses, different framing, switching it up. Got my girl here to stand in and try taking some with her instead. So really, just to talk about kind of the composition of this shot, we've got this sunset right over here. It's hitting this ridge, and then there's this nice line of like darkness and light. So hopefully in the edit, I'll be able to kind of exaggerate that. So I'm thinking of all of this while I'm actually taking the photos. Like, okay, how am I going to edit this? What's it going to be framed up like? And then just taking a few different compositions. So shooting from lower, shooting from higher. And hopefully this is helpful just to see like how many flipping shots go into finding just like one good one, getting the right one. And what's so hilarious? Look at my pants. I did not realize my pant leg was rolled up, so that's going to be a fun little Lightroom fix. So that one's okay. I'm going to mark that as like a maybe. That one I like. Now, if you want to skip ahead to the editing tutorial, that's totally fine. But I'm just showing you, like, this is what goes into actually finding that one image. So, and then I took some others on the ridge. We're going around. So out of this entire shoot, hundreds and hundreds of photos, there's probably like 2 or 3 that I will actually repost. So let's see. We got 637 photos for 3 keepers. So that's kind of the lesson here. When you're shooting, take lots of photos. Like you're on this ridge, you got this light, or wherever you are, you want to experiment, right? Like, okay, shoot from up high, shoot from down low, aim it to the left a little bit, to the right a little bit. Adjust your exposure and maybe see if you have more depth of field or less depth of field. Switch lenses and see how that works. Try different poses, right? There's so many different combinations. And really, when you're out there, you've already gone to all this effort of finding the right light, finding the location, having all your gear set up. You might as well shoot a lot. You want to set it to maybe medium burst mode so that as you're taking photos, it's not just 1, 2, 3 and hope you get it. It's like take 100 of different combinations of different things so that later on you can hopefully find one that like the magic sauce was on. Okay, so let's head over into Lightroom. I'm just going to grab these raw files I tagged, and I'm just showing you my whole process here today. So I'm going to copy and move these. I like to move the raw files into one I call raw bangers. This is just for my travel stuff. So I'm going to copy it. I'm going to leave the original files on the card because I might come back to it later and grab some from some different scenes. And then we're going to head over into Lightroom. Okay, So without further ado, we're going to start editing. If you want to grab the raw file, grab it at signatureedits.com/free-raw-photos. I'm going to hit G to go into grid view. That's going to let me import some fresh shots. Head over into my raw bangers file. Grab these beauties and hope we got something worth editing today. So we're going to hit import. I'm making previews at 1:1. Honestly, because I'm just editing one photo at a time, it doesn't really matter what those settings are. I'm okay for it to take a little longer. I'm going to hit the D key to develop. We're just going to see which is our favorite of the three. So I've got this one. Definitely that one's better. And this one. I'm between the two of them. I'm kind of torn. I don't know why the color is so weird, but we'll fix that later. Definitely this one or this one. I think for the purpose of the gram, this one I like better because in this particular composition, I'm covering up the mountains and behind. So again, if I had a telephoto lens, those mountains would have seemed so much closer and bigger in behind me. Like it would have been majestic, but I'll just have to go back here and that's fine because there's larches here. It's going to be really beautiful in a couple of weeks when all of these trees in the background change color to yellow. You got to see it. Okay, so I'm going to just experiment with a couple of my presets because sometimes they can save me a lot of trouble. So you can see there, color's pretty nice. And the colors are going to be really easy to get looking poppin' today because, all right, probably this one seems to feel the best. The color is going to be easy to get poppin' because I'm shooting with the sun. So the sun is actually over here. It's hitting me on the side, and I'm shooting in the same kind of direction as the sunlight. If I were focused on a shot that was backlit, so let me show you one in this portfolio that is backlit. We go to all photographs. This photo right here. Absolutely backlit, and so because of that, the sky is just not going to be as blue. The colors are just not going to be as vibrant as if I were shooting in the other direction. Let me show you from this same shoot. This is shooting with the sun. Exact same location, just turned around. See how much more pop in the colors are just like by default? So that's one thing to be aware of. As you're shooting in the sunset, you're not always trying to shoot backlit. Because the light's so nice and low in the sky, you can actually shoot with the sun and get really beautiful colors. Okay, so let's head over here. And let's get to editing. So first I'm going to adjust my exposure and just bring it down. Basically, I'm adjusting the exposure kind of for the highlights. It's a little bit dark there, somewhere around there. Okay. Next, I'm going to just play around here. We're going to probably raise the highlights up a little bit. Raise the shadows. I'm just going to make it a little bit more flat. Take the contrast down. And just so you know, there's no preset being applied here. I'm going to do it without, just so you can see my process. I'm going to raise the whites up to kind of that level. I'm sort of looking at my histogram and seeing, okay, am I clipping anything? If you ever want to see if you're clipping, just hit the J key on your keyboard. And as long as these guys are highlighted, it will show you if anything is being clipped, either in the whites or the blacks. And what clip means is just you're losing data. It's pure black instead of just like really close to black. So you're starting to lose detail in your highlights and your shadows. Okay, and then I can do the same thing with the blacks if I wanted. And you can see as it's starting to clip, I see this little bit of blue. So I'll take it down just before that. And same thing with the whites. I don't really care if there's a little pure white in the clouds, but for now we'll just leave it like that. So here's before and here's after. So far we've just gotten rid of a whole bunch of contrast, but hopefully we've also recovered some detail and we can make the photo pop a little bit better later on, okay? So next I'm going to go down to my tone curve and just add a little S curve. So to do that, you're going to click 3 times, once in the middle, once in the highs, and once in the shadows over here. Shadows you bring down, highlights you bring up, and you add all this contrast back into the image. Again, we're watching to make sure we don't clip anything. I'm okay with having the tiniest bit of black on my pants and the tiniest bit of pure white on the clouds. So here's without the tone curve, and here's with. So I'm going to hit J so I can hide my clipping now. And so far that's looking pretty good. Like we got some pop in colors. That might be even a little bit too much contrast, but it's looking nice. I like that. Okay, let's head down into the calibration panel at the very bottom. And I'm just going to adjust it because I know that my jacket and this grass is like looking a little bit too green. Like if you look at my really super awesome expression here, you can see my skin is like pretty yellow. So we're actually going to try just messing around with the reds just a little bit and maybe even the shadows too. If you want to get really beautiful sunset colors, I find in general, this is just not always true, but if you take the shadows towards magenta, your sunset colors will tend to pop a little bit better. Okay, something like that. Maybe the reds, we took it a little bit too far, something around there. And then let's just play around here. We're using the calibration tool not necessarily to fix anything in Lightroom, More we're just trying to see what happens when we adjust these various sliders. So maybe if we take our blue saturation up and our red saturation down, sometimes that looks cool, sometimes it doesn't. Same thing with the greens all the way up, and sometimes the blues you go all the way down. So here's without that, and here's with that. So it just changes the vibe of the photo, whether you like it better or worse, I don't know. You can also adjust the hue here a little bit, depending on what you're feeling. I think it's somewhere around there, and then I'll add a little bit of saturation back, just see what happens. Find a blend. You know what, I kind of like that. That's pretty good. I'm gonna raise the exposure just a little, maybe, maybe not. Okay, so here's before, here's after. This photo honestly doesn't need a ton of work. It looks pretty good like that because the light was just great. But I do want to kind of exaggerate this darkness and light that I talked about earlier. So I'm going to hit K on my keyboard. Make sure auto mask is turned off. My flow is all the way up. My feather is all the way up. And I'm just going to hit click once. And any of the areas you see showing up as color, that's where my mask is. You can actually change what color the mask is showing up as just by heading up here to this little overlay panel. And of course, if you're on an older version of Lightroom, this is going to look slightly different, but it's all good. It's more or less the same. You can just go up here to where it says color overlay, and you can select whatever color you want that overlay to be. So I'm going to go with pink because it's a color that'll show up. And now I can see exactly where my beautiful, beautiful mask is. I'm going to reset and probably just turn the dehaze up. That'll sort of do what I want it to do, which is just darken things down. Hit O again, and I'm going to have to clean this up because this ridge, I don't want everything bleeding over here. So I'll hit Alt on my keyboard. That'll toggle to my eraser. Just erase it off of the mountain in the back. I just want the hill. That is it. Okay. Something like that. That's looking not too bad. I'm going to raise the highlights up in there and the whites, and that'll just make this mask hopefully a little bit more transparent because we're keeping the bright stuff bright. We're just darkening things that were already dark. And then I'm going to maybe dial back the dehaze and take my exposure down and probably take my texture and clarity down a little bit too. Because I don't need that to have a whole lot of detail. It'll disappear a little bit more. So here's without that, and here's with. So it just adds a little bit more focus to the composition, right? Because now we have more of a leading line going up towards our subject here in the middle. And we're taking some of the distracting elements of the photo out of the way. So this really wasn't adding to the photo, right? You don't go look at this and say, oh, what a beautiful patchy gravel field. But once you get rid of it, it now adds some really interesting contrast to the scene. In my opinion, you might not like it. That's okay. Also, if this video is helpful for you, can you do me a big favor? Hit the thumbs up and leave a comment below. It could literally just be like, sweet, or awesome, or tell me a funny joke. I don't care. Just help the YouTube overlords decide that this content is worth sharing with other people. All right, so we got beautiful mountains in behind me. The last thing that we could do probably is just focus on exaggerating those a little bit more. So a couple different ways we could do it. One would be just dodging and burning. So that's basically where you just raise the highlights and the whites, and you go through here, and anything that is a highlight, we're going to paint over. What a concept. And that's just going to make the whole thing pop a little bit more, right? Because we're adding contrast to the scene. So same goes with the mountains. And you can see as I'm doing this, if I was a little less sloppy, we can maybe turn on auto mask to help us. There we go. As I'm doing this, the mountains just sort of come to life a little bit. We're really exaggerating the highlights. And so that's just going to add a little bit more texture, a little bit more contrast, a little bit more pop to the whole image. So any of the areas that are a natural highlight, I'm just going to go for. Brush over, not being super, super picky. Same goes with these mountains, which are really dark and behind us. I'm probably going to use a new mask for this one because it's all blue, so I don't want to make the colors weird. But you can see here's before and here's after. Really just bring some texture, bring some pop, bring some interest. Again, before. Oh, before. Wait for it. Before and after. Right? Makes a pretty big difference. I might have overdone it on this mountain here. We'll just go a little bit more broad with our strokes. And of course, if you wanted to, you could just brush on the whole thing and then raise up the whites and the highlights, but it's not going to be quite as intense as if you went through and just like really selectively dial it in. Okay, so I like this side of the mountains. This side is still pretty like, eh. It needs a little bit more pop, a little bit more something something. So I might add a lens flare by hitting Shift-M on my keyboard. I could dodge and burn, but because this area is in like total shadow, I feel like that isn't going to do much or work the way I want it to. So instead, I'm going to make a lens flare. I'm going to reset this by holding Alt, hit reset, and I'm going to take the exposure up, warmth all the way up, maybe add a little bit of magenta in there, and we could even go down to our color and add some orange. I'm feeling a really orange sunset today. Really colorful. Okay, now I'm going to take my dehaze down. I'm going to take clarity down, texture down, sharpness down, shadows up, blacks up. And now we got this nice little portable spotlight. A little bit of lens flare. Something like that. Expand it. And you always want to position this where the sun actually is. So this is only going to feel sort of realistic because the sun actually was off to the side of this. If we make it a little bit bigger, it'll be a little bit more gradual. We can maybe take our magenta down, just get the colors right. Dial the exposure back, doesn't need to be quite so bright. So you can see here's without it and here's with it. Like maybe you like it better without, and that's totally fine. I feel like just a little something something. I'm going to keep playing with the colors because it doesn't feel quite right. It's too purple. Maybe adjust this a little bit. Try without, try with. Take that down. Okay. So somewhere around there feels pretty good. It's adding a little bit of extra interest, exaggerating the fact that it's sunset in this scene. That's feeling pretty good. And then I still want to add a little bit more kind of pop to those mountains in the back. So easiest way to do that, I'm just going to trace all of them. And I'm going for the highlights more than anything. I'm not going to worry about all the way over here because that's where the lens flare is anyways. Hold down Alt to reset that brush, and then I can just play around, like maybe add some texture or a little clarity. That'll help pop things. And it's all about finding balance, right? So by taking clarity up to around here, it looks pretty good on the mountains in behind me, but the mountains off to the right, not so much. So I'm going to hold Alt, take my flow down, and that's going to toggle to my eraser by holding Alt. And I'm going to erase it off these mountains. That's okay. So here's before and here's after. We've really shaped the light so that we're focusing in on our subject. We're eliminating distracting elements. We're popping those colors. We're making sure we don't clip things too much, but we're really adding a lot of vibrancy. And that kind of gets us more or less where I want to be. I think I might take one last step here. Just play around with the sky a little bit and maybe raise the blacks very slightly. Just so we're not crushing things quite so much. And I guess one last thing that we could do is maybe just play with the texture on this jacket and on this grass right around the subject. So again, we're kind of just dodging and burning, right? So I'm aiming for the grass, and you can see how it just sort of lights on fire. Really starts to pop as I go over it. So great editing is not about creating something that never was most of the time. I mean, if you're a Photoshop expert, then maybe it is. But it's more or less exaggerating the things that are already there. So I'm taking the highlights and whites up in those areas, taking the shadows down. And we've really added some extra pop to that grass. So here's before and here's after. Really just came alive. And lastly, let's try the sky. We're just going to go for the clouds. Same kind of idea. You can see it's such a beautiful mask I've got going on. I'm going to turn the auto mask off. Not really helpful. So a couple things you can do with the clouds. We could make them more hazy, kind of less clear and more dreamy if we wanted to. We could also try and add some pop or a little bit of color. Maybe make them cotton candy clouds. So I'm just masking them really quick. Super, super detailed, perfect mask, as you can see. That was a joke. I'm going to reset this entire brush. Okay. And then I'm going to just try a few things. We'll try adding a little bit of purple, a little bit of cotton candy action. And of course, since my mask is super, super accurate, I can't push it that far, but I can do a little bit. And then you can try just increasing the highlights very slightly. But of course, you're going to see how bad my masking is. Maybe we'll try just a bit of dehaze, bit of clarity, something like that. Okay, and lastly, of course, we didn't play around with the HSL. We didn't play around with the split toning. So if you wanted to, you can mess around, add some more blue to the sky, or make the sky more purple if you want that sunsetty vibe. Same with the shadows. I feel like some warm shadows would be nice. That'll just line up with the sunset vibe. Like that. I'm not really feeling like a whole lot of color. It's pretty good on its own. The really tricky part is just knowing where to stop in Lightroom, right? Because you can keep going and going and going. Here's before the color and here's after. We're just adding like the slightest bit more blue to the sky, and I'm happy with that. I feel like that at this point is kind of where I want it. I'm going to hit L on my keyboard a couple times just so I can see this against a black background. And yeah, it's looking pretty good. We could experiment with different sizes, so see what it'll look like when it's on an actual cell phone, on the gram. Pretty good. We can maybe even darken everything down a little bit to bring more focus onto the subject. And also I could maybe change the color of my pants slightly if we zoom in here. So I could make it a little bit darker. And of course, I've got like the world's most ridiculous expression on, but that's okay because honestly, you can't see it. That's the beauty of a super wide shot. So just take the shadows down maybe a little bit. A little towards magenta. Lightroom is now officially struggling. We'll take our blacks down. Something like that. It'll pop just a bit more maybe. Maybe. Good. And because now I'm zoomed in and I see all of this awesomeness that is my strange face, I'm going to grab this healing brush, make our brush nice and small, and just fix this little tuft of weird hair sticking out. Not too worried about it being perfect because no one's going to see it because I couldn't see it zoomed out anyways. Okay, that's feeling pretty dang good. We got a highlight on the jacket. Maybe I might pull that back just a bit so that we really get the nice orange color. Highlights back. Okay, that's much better. What's the point of wearing an orange jacket if it's not even orange? Okay. Marvelous. So that is that. I'm going to export this into Photoshop and just take a quick look if I can improve it a little bit in there. So we're just going to go Photo, Edit in Photoshop. This is something I've started doing with my photos that I just find you can add a little bit of extra pop sometimes. So I'll show you that. But if you wanted to, that would be the finished photo. So if this was helpful, can you please leave me a comment below, like and subscribe. I'm going to show you my last little process here in Photoshop. Just the final touches. I'm going to double click this, hit enter, move this panel. Then I'm going to copy this layer with Command C on my keyboard and Command V. You could literally just right click it and go duplicate layer if you wanted to. I'm going to hit where it says normal, select multiply. This is what I find really adds some extra pop to the images. Go to adjustments and to levels. You're going to take this one on the right all the way down. This one on the middle all the way down is what I actually meant. And the one on the right, you just dial in and see what feels right. So say like that. So here's before that and after that. We've just added a little bit more pop to the entire image. That's too much, so I'm going to dial it back to maybe like 50%. That's before and that's after. So that, I think that's my finished image. It looks pretty good. Now, if you wanted to, of course, you could also erase parts of this layer. So if you hit E on your keyboard or just go to this eraser, I could then erase it off me if I'm like, I don't want that much contrast on me, but I like it on the rest of the scene. Or, for example, here on the foreground, I feel like it's really harsh. So let's just erase. Undo a couple things, hit Command Z. Okay. I feel like it's really harsh here. So I'm going to take the opacity of my eraser down to say like 25%. And I'm just going to erase that effect off of this part of the scene. Good. So take your opacity all the way up. Then the parts that are just too much, we can dial right back. So here's before, here's after. So now we're just adding pop selectively to the sky. The mountains are getting nice and crispy. And I'm thinking that's pretty dang good. I like that. It's feeling good. dial it back a little bit, because in my experience, I always take things too far. So just take it where you think it looks good and dial it back like 20, 30%. And we could also, just because we're messing around at this point, we're making this video as long as possible, we're going to hit the B key to toggle to brush. Or if you're like me, it's not cooperating, hit B once you've deselected the opacity. And in another of my videos, I've got a little how to make lens flares. And I've made these light rays inside of Photoshop. It's just a custom brush. I'm going to hit new to make a new layer. Adjust the angle of this brush so that it's coming from the right direction. Like that. So we could experiment with like, okay, what if we add a little bit of sun flare right there? So that looks super realistic, I know. Now we just add a color overlay and find the right kind of color. Probably there-ish, maybe a little more green. I'm just matching it to the scene. I know, it looks so real. You couldn't even tell it wasn't real. Then I'm going to take the opacity way down and maybe just adjust the blend mode to like soft light or pin light. Okay, somewhere around there-ish. Hit Command T to make that brush bigger, and I'm just going to like do one of these and set it like that. Okay, there's before, there's after. Whether or not you like that more or less or in between, I don't know. Just a nice little thing. So if you want to check out the tutorial on how to do this, you can find it on the channel. I posted a week ago, a couple weeks ago, depending when you watch this video. It was the video before this one, a couple before this one. So here's before that and here's after that. You can decide which you like better. I think I'm going to dial it back to like 9%, so it's barely there. And then I'm happy. Just a little extra something, something again. I'm zooming out, finding different angles to view it from to see like, okay, do I like this? Zoomed in or zoomed out? Like, do I want this? Does it add to the image or take away? Because just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. I'm thinking, though, it's kind of interesting, adds a little bit of extra something and just builds on that lens flare, makes it a little more realistic. So that's that. Now I'm going to hit Shift Command Option S, or I could just hit Command S, and that's automatically going to make a new version over here in Photoshop for me in a minute. There we go. So now you can see here's before Photoshop. Nope, wait for it. Here's before Photoshop, and here's after Photoshop. So just add a little bit more contrast, a little more punch, and of course that little bit of lens flare over to the side. I'm going to export my photo. I like to export it just big, but I'll name it whatever the name of the place was. So Ptarmigan Loop, I think. And then the date. Whatever that date was for you. Okay. I set it to just, full quality, full size. I'm good. So I'll export it like that. And we're ready. So if this video was helpful, do me a favor. Let me know what part you really took away that you can apply to your photos in your next shoot. And if you have any questions, comments, things I didn't address, leave those below. Hit that like button. Make sure to subscribe and grab some free presets if you want them. I'll leave links in the description. In the meantime, create something awesome. Peace.